Ladies and gentlemen, what just happened in Washington is absolutely insane. You've got two Democrat judges back to back just ordered President Donald J. Trump's administration to fork over billions of dollars in SNAP funding during a government shutdown. And at the exact same time, the Department of Justice has launched a full-scale criminal probe into Black Lives Matter's missing millions. That's right, folks. On the one hand, we've got liberal judges forcing Trump to spend money that he didn't even authorize, effectively overriding executive authority in the middle of a government shutdown. But on the other side, you got the Biden-era darlings of the left, the same organization that racked in nearly $90 million off the George Floyd riots, are now being investigated for fraud and donor deception. Now, it's really a double blow that nobody saw coming. The courts are in chaos, the media is in meltdown mode, and the Democrats, well, let's just say that they're trying desperately to spin it before the truth goes viral. Because if this ruling stands, it doesn't just force the president to spend billions of dollars, it sets a very dangerous precedent that judges can literally rewrite the law in real time. And as for BLM, well, the DOJ's message is clear. No one is above the law anymore. So buckle up, guys, because today, whenever you're watching the show, we're exposing exactly how this SNAP ruling, the BLM probe, and of course, the Democrat panic in DC are all connected, and how it just might backfire in a way that they never expected. Hit the like button and subscribe. All right, let's start with the breaking development that shook Washington to its core, because within minutes of each other, you had two federal judges, one in Boston and another in Rhode Island, issuing rulings ordering the Trump administration to release billions of dollars in emergency SNAP funds. Now, think about that, okay? Two Democrat-appointed judges stepping in during a government shutdown to tell the sitting president of the United States of America how to spend money? This is unheard of. Now, they claim that the administration must tap a $6 billion USDA contingency fund to keep benefits flowing for 42 million Americans. But here's a twist. This wasn't a defeat for Trump. In fact, it was a setup for a much larger fight over executive power, because by forcing this payout, these judges have effectively confirmed what Trump's team has been saying all along, that the courts are acting like a second legislature. Legal experts are warning that this could become the blueprint for judicial overreach, where effectively unelected judges dictate fiscal policy in real time. Now, the tension could not be any higher at this point. So President Trump's advisors, they're calling this ruling reckless and unconstitutional. So while Democrats are celebrating this thing like it's a moral leadership deal, make no mistake, this wasn't compassion. It was purely control. And so now the reason that these rulings even happened is because of the political cage match that has been raging in Washington for weeks. So Congress hit a stalemate over spending. Democrats refused to compromise on border funding and work requirement reforms. Now, Republicans refused to keep writing blank checks. And that gridlock right there triggered yet another government shutdown. The lights go out, agencies freeze, and instantly millions of Americans are thrown into uncertainty. Now, the USDA warned every state, if the government remains closed, SNAP cards stop reloading November 1st. Now, that message alone sent shockwaves through low-income households and state food bank networks across the country. But here's the thing. This isn't the first time that the left has weaponized panic. Every time there's a shutdown, Democrats run to the cameras crying starvation while quietly using it as leverage to force new spending. But Trump called it out bluntly, open the government and the funds move instantly. As simple as that. But Democrats refuse to do that, preferring the optics of chaos over cooperation. And that right there is exactly what the judges played into. By ruling to override executive authority, they turned a temporary standoff into a constitutional crisis. The shutdown isn't just about money anymore. It's about control of the country's steering wheel. You know, while the government's busy arguing about who gets paid, there is one group that just cannot afford to wait. Retirees dealing with Medicare. Now, the biggest mistake that retirees make with Medicare is waiting until the plan changes, waiting until bills pile up, waiting until it's just too late. This is why I partner with Chapter, because they help you review your Medicare plan now before the problems show up. Now, one of our viewers, she told me, I waited too long, but Chapter still helped me fix my Medicare coverage. So let me ask, are you going to just keep waiting, or are you going to do what most people already are and start taking action today? Now, most people are calling that phone number right there at the bottom of your screen, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron. That phone number again is 909-563-8279. And of course, if you're waiting too long on that phone line, just click the website. It's way faster. That way you don't have to wait on hold. And speaking of viewers, Check this out. Denise Hartman, 4268, said, "Good. I am so glad Vance called out these globalists. Lobbying and bureaucrats influencing government is bribery and should be illegal. America first." Oh, and Chapter should give peace of mind when it comes to insurance coverage for anybody who needs help navigating their insurance coverage, because I'm sick of being nickel and dime to death and having to pay a fortune for mine. And I'm sick and tired of having to fund free healthcare for illegals. Well, I'm so happy to hear that this engagement with Chapter helped you out a lot today. Now, let's get into the legal heart of this entire showdown, because this is where everything spirals into constitutional chaos. Look, the USDA has what is called a contingency fund, okay? It's about $6 billion sitting there for emergencies. But here's a catch. By law, those funds can only flow when the main SNAP program is active and funded by Congress. In other words, if the government's shut down, that fund becomes untouchable. Now, President Trump's legal team argued exactly that. The law is crystal clear, but the judges tried to twist the statute, zeroing in on one word buried deep in the SNAP Act: shall. The law says benefits shall be paid, and the judges claim that that means the administration is legally required to pay even without an active appropriation. Now, that is not interpretation. That is invention, okay? It's judicial activism dressed up as compassion, because if courts can reinterpret one word to force billions of dollars in spending, then what's next, right? Could a future judge declare an emergency and order payouts for student loans or climate reparations? I mean, this is the dangerous precedent that Trump's allies are warning about tonight. A ruling that trades fiscal discipline for political theater and then hands unelected judges the nation's checkbook. So now, while all of this is happening in the courtrooms, the political fireworks are lighting up in Washington right now. President Trump, he's been crystal clear. The Democrats, they're playing politics with the lives of the very people that they claim to protect. He said it aboard Air Force One: if Democrats simply vote to reopen the government, SNAP continues immediately. But instead, they would rather use suffering as leverage to score some points on TV. And the media, they're spinning it like Trump doesn't care about poor families, completely ignoring that it's the Democrats holding the door shut. The irony? The majority of SNAP recipients live in Democrat-controlled districts. The Democrats are literally starving their own constituents. President Trump even said it himself. They're hurting their own people, and he's right about that. When those judges forced the payout, Democrats celebrated, pretending that they won for the people. But anybody who's paying attention already knows better. This was about optics, not outcomes. This is about headlines, not hunger. Now, Trump's camp sees it as proof that the establishment can't win in Congress, so it hides behind these activist judges instead. And this is why the president's approval rating keeps climbing, because people are seeing straight through this manipulation here. So now let's talk about the human side of this mess, because while DC politicians bicker and judges play puppet master, 42 million Americans are the ones caught in the middle. These are hardworking families, veterans, single parents, seniors, people who rely on that SNAP card to put food on the table. Now, in late October, they started hearing the rumors. Payments might not reload in November 1st. Panic spread fast. Grocery store shelves were cleared, food banks flooded, and governors from red and blue states alike begged Washington to act. But here's the real kicker. The crisis didn't have to happen at all. In fact, the money was sitting there, ready, all ready to go. All Congress had to do was reopen the government. But instead, Democrats used those families as hostages in a political standoff. And so when the judges swooped in to save the day, so to speak, they didn't fix the problem. They exposed it. Because if it takes two federal judges to make sure Americans can buy groceries, then something is deeply broken with the system. Can I get an amen to that, right? President Trump's team, they already knew that. They warned that the left would turn SNAP into another emotional weapon, and they were right. The tragedy is real, but so is the manipulation behind it. So while the SNAP ruling was sending shockwaves through Washington, another bombshell hit, one that the mainstream media tried desperately to bury. The Department of Justice has officially launched a criminal investigation into senior leadership at the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Now, sources inside of the DOJ are saying that investigators are probing whether BLM leaders defrauded donors, laundered funds through shell nonprofits, and misused millions intended for radical or racial justice initiatives. Well, this isn't speculation. It's actually backed up by receipts. Remember that $6 million California mansion that BLM purchased? Or how about the lavish parties that were allegedly hosted there under the guise of creative space? Well, the probe digs into all of that. Now, here's the irony. The same politicians who demanded transparency from Trump, they're dead silent now that their own allies are under federal scrutiny. So what makes this moment historic is the timing. Now, for years, critics called BLM untouchable. But now, under Trump's Justice Department, that illusion of immunity is gone. The moment that rose on claims of moral purity, it's facing a reckoning for financial corruption. It's not just a scandal. This is a collapse of credibility for the entire progressive machine that used BLM as a political shield. Now, let's go ahead and pull back the curtain just for a little bit, even further on the Black Lives Matter situation, because the numbers alone tell a completely different story of greed that is disguised as virtue. Look, in 2020, during the George Floyd riots, the BLM Global Network Foundation reportedly raised over $90 million in donations. Now, the average gift, about $30. Many of those donors, they were everyday Americans, young people, teachers, even retirees who genuinely believed that their money would go toward helping the victims or rebuilding devastated neighborhoods. But the reality? The money disappeared into a fog of consulting contracts, creative retreats, and luxury real estate. How about a $6 million mansion in California? Another $8 million in Toronto. Executive salaries and payouts to strategic partners who just so happen to be relatives or even friends of the organization's founders. Meanwhile, not 1 cent was traced to families of the victims whose names were used to raise that money. Now, here's where it gets even darker. Internal emails leaked over the last year show that some BLM insiders begged leadership to hire outside accountants. They were ignored. Instead, the group stonewalled questions, scrubbed websites, and attacked critics as racist. But now that the DOJ is on their doorstep, every receipt is about to see daylight. Now, here's where it all ties together, okay? So the Snap ruling and the BLM probe are not random. There are two sides of the same coin. You got a system that's forced to reckon with accountability. On the one side, you've got activist judges telling the president how to spend taxpayer money, using emotional pressure as a legal weapon. But on the other side, you've got federal investigators finally telling activist organizations that they can treat America's compassion like an ATM. It's a collision of power, the judiciary versus the executive, and the government versus the ideological movements that it once protected. And you can already feel the panic that's building in DC, because if President Trump can be forced to spend billions by the courts, meanwhile, his Justice Department is simultaneously exposing fraud within the left's biggest fundraising machine, well, that, my friends, is a political earthquake. So this is what they mean by a double blow. Judicial chaos on one hand, federal accountability on the other one. The left thought that they could weaponize the courts and activism at the same time, but President Trump flipped the script on them. So now both the bench and the movement are on defense. Washington's cracking, and for the first time in years, the American people are starting to see who is really pulling the strings here. Now, this moment isn't just political, it's cultural. What we're watching right now is a collision of ideologies that have been brewing for over a decade. Now, on the one side, you've got the America First movement led by President Trump, pushing for accountability, fiscal sanity, and national unity. But on the other side, a left-wing establishment that built an entire identity around grievance, guilt, and government dependence. Now, these rulings and investigations expose the divide like never before. Think about it. Activist judges bending the law to send money that we don't even have. Meanwhile, activist leaders bend morality to spend donations that they never earned. Both sides of that corruption rely on one thing: emotion over logic. Sympathy, they're using sympathy as a shield. But America's waking up to this. People are realizing that compassion doesn't mean chaos and justice doesn't mean mob rule. And so there's another layer here, guys. The cultural decay of responsibility. When immigrants can't speak English but can drive 18-wheelers across state lines, when politicians praise lawbreakers but punish business owners, when schools glorify protests but silence parents, this is not progress, it's collapse. What we're seeing right now isn't just a fight over money or programs. This is a fight over the moral center of the country itself. So what does all of this mean for President Trump and the road ahead? Well, simple: momentum. These so-called setbacks, they're turning into political victories because every overreach, every ruling, every investigation proves exactly what President Trump's been saying since day one. The system is broken and the elites are terrified of losing control. So by forcing him to pay out SNAP funds, the judges thought that they were embarrassing him. But in reality, they handed him the perfect stage to expose the judicial circus. He can now point directly to the bench and say, look, they don't want justice, they want power. Meanwhile, his Justice Department is tearing down one of the left's scared crows in real time, the BLM brand that they built their entire social movement on. Now, heading into 2026, this combination of court battles and accountability crusades, it is galvanizing President Trump's base like never before. Independents are seeing that the chaos isn't coming from the White House, it's coming from the ones that are trying to stop it. And if this keeps up, 2028 won't just be another election. It will be the final reckoning before America's forgotten working class and the elites who spent decades writing the rules that they never follow. So here's where we stand, guys. Judges rewriting laws, activists rewriting history, and a president rewriting the playbook. The double blow that we saw this week, forced SNAP payouts and a full-scale BLM probe, it is shaking the very foundation of Washington's old guard. And while the left panics, President Trump just keeps winning battles that they never saw coming. Now, if you believe accountability still matters, if you're tired of seeing corruption rewarded and law-abiding citizens punished, you need to share this video. Make sure every American knows exactly what's being exposed right now. Hit the like button, subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.